Okay, relational dialectics then. The last of our chapters that we'll be reviewing in this kind of intensive way, because after this we will have completed our map of the territory that Griffin lays out. And so anything after this, we're going to be working on kind of placing of theories and utilization of theories. So probably last lecture I'm going to be uploading, I think. That's the goal. Phenomenological theories are thought of as among the most interpretive of the theories, whereas our critical theories are in this way also focused on difference and focused on sort of non-normative, dissensus-based approaches to theorizing. This approach is, again, from a dissensus perspective, assuming that everybody's theories are going to be very unique, that there is little to be said about communication in general, and that the best we can kind of hope to do is point to some of the ranges of variation that are interesting to look at. Similarly, unlike other theories where range of variation is of interest, like with rhetorical theories, there is that, again, sense of it's unique to each situation and we should be imagining what the situation calls forth. And so theory is nothing more than an attempt to adapt individual to situation. Here again, we're looking at things from an individual perspective. Indeed, one of the things that's fascinating about most phenomenological theories is that a lot of what's interesting going on is thought of as intrapersonal communication, i.e. the communication one involves with oneself. The ways in which, for example, identity gets constructed is an example of phenomenological theory, typically. And so the processes through which we go through establishing our perceptions and living in our own world and creating our own world, assuming that it is our own world and not a shared world for the most part. So relational dialectics is an example of this in a variety of ways. One of the things that the textbook does is it lays out a number of dimensions along which we think that relationships vary, not just once, but continuously and ongoingly. It's dialectical in the sense that I would not expect the same relationship to be exhibiting the same reaction to tensions from one moment to the next. And it would be expected to be very fast changing. So things like doing a survey of your relational experience would be of limited utility because it's asking you to generalize, and phenomenological theories deny generalizability altogether. So what do we do with it instead? Well, one of the things that we often find it really useful for is for understanding why relationships are so much work even when they're well-established relationships, and why there's continuous and ongoing tensions. In fact, where so many of the interpersonal theories that we've studied, for example, like social exchange theory, expects that over time it should get easier to be in a relationship, right? Because according to social penetration theory, you've gotten to know this person really well, and so you've understood the essence of this person. And we worked out equitable exchanges over time, and so I have a good interaction history in which to do these kinds of negotiations. And I think most of us agree that experientially, we don't find that to be true. Relationships don't get necessarily somehow easy just because they're long-term. Indeed, family relationships are among the most complex. Right? Right. So Baxter and Montgomery have tried to identify some of the sources of tensions in ongoing relationships, and probably the one that gets most talked about is the integration-separation one, the extent to which people want to spend their time together versus the extent to which they want to have individual and separate identities. And we can all watch relationships where we've seen people go wrong in one and another direction of that. So for example, what would you think of as being kind of the hallmarks of a relationship that has gone way overboard in the integration direction? We're looking at page 156 for a chart laying out some of these dialectical tensions, by the way. And these key ones Griffin has gone through and explained. I should probably point out that Baxter and Montgomery identify a host of other additional relational dialectics. And indeed, in principle, there's no reason why there should be some finite number of relational dialectics. One could imagine having tensions ongoingly over any number of differences. But these are the ones that most commonly get used. So let me answer my own question, since I seem to be need to leave y'all time to glance through. We've met couples where they've really gone so far overboard on that integration dimension, and okay, maybe we should even accuse me of doing so, right? When did my husband's job become so much part of my identity that I say we automatically, like I have been all morning before we started the class officially, just talking about our weekends. And I keep using the pronoun, this plural pronoun. Who is this we? There is no we of that sort, right? So that's an example of where integration has been prioritized in that dialectical tension, and it's going to need to swing back, right? A couple can't stay permanently in that place of constant integration. It isn't healthy either.
There's a lot of ones about that as far as like with parent-child relationships.
Yes.
Where parents live through their children or try to, you know, like at a soccer game, the most invested and the most heated are the parents. The kids don't seem to really care, but the parents get really angry because they are...
Yes. Yes. Parents can all speak to having seen this action on the ball field, right? Exactly. And so the parent is striving for integration, 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 integration. And it's problematic. The kid usually is, if not immediately, but is going to have to do work on separation component of that. Now, at some point, we would imagine that if that's an ongoing tension, things will have to change. So let us imagine, let's continue working on this parent-child relational dyad, where parent has been pushing towards the integration side, kid has been pushing back on the separation side. What's going to happen longer term? How will that tension kind of play itself out, would we imagine?
Resentment in therapy.
So one thing it might play itself out as is that having managed not to have separation balanced within the tension, the dyad essentially breaks at that point, and after the kid goes off to college and goes through years of therapy, mom is on the deathbed and we're finally ready to reconcile. Maybe.
That escalated quickly.
That escalated quickly. We can imagine happier endings, I think. What would be more likely to happen in an ongoing changing relationship without breaking that dyad apart?
One side would have to give a little bit. I mean,
Right. At some point, right? And it's probably going to happen somewhere late teen years, early college years, right? There'll be smaller balancings continuously all the way through growing up. But somewhere in there, right, the kid is going to do something where the parent just throws up their hands and say, I give up, right? And there's these little moments that moms go through of like, go solve your own problem. right? And where you deliberately have to emphasize separation, right? And so as the parent emphasizes towards separation, it gives room for the child to emphasize integration. And that is oftentimes what we see happening, right? How many of your peers in college do you know that you see them texting their parent, right? Before class, after class? Maybe y'all don't hang around enough.
Yeah, I was just saying, I'm not as
You've
traditional.
seen, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Just little five-line,
yeah.
5-word texts, just kind of nonstop though.
Yeah, and I think that there was a sitcom about that or something.
Oh, okay.
About, that even through, okay, so the kid thinks that they're making an effort on texting mom, and the mom thinks you can't even use complete sentences to talk to your mother. And I mean, so.
So there's still an ongoing integration-separation dialectic, but that's also an example of a stability change, an expression, non-expression dialectic. Indeed, maybe it's useful to think about one of the ways in which that integration-separation dialectic gets managed is that we do have these other kind of continuums. And so I might be focusing on the separation component of my dialectical tensions right now, trying to achieve differentiation from partner in some sense, maybe, but focus on the expression component of the dialectic as well to keep the relationship strong simultaneously while establishing separate identity. As with, for example, the example that Caitlin's talking about. Right? Parent has decided it's separation time, right? College kid has its own identity, its own life, and has to make the effort, if the relationship is going to continue, to do some integration work. Parent is now focusing on the expression side of that, i.e., you give me these 5-word texts, they're not sentences, they're not telling me, they're checking in, but without relationship expression, relationship maintenance work. Does that seem useful as a way? You can kind of see maybe why the theory is a fairly popular one, and it doesn't work well if you focus on just one dialectical tension. I mean, yeah, we can find lots and lots of examples of relationships where the integration-separation thing is maybe an initial focus, but a lot of the times what's more interesting is to focus on the ways in which people flux across multiple of the dynamics. So think about, for example, your high school friends. Everybody is still in touch with their high school friends? We've achieved separation pretty thoroughly on those, right? Indeed, for most of us, I'm guessing you connect back with them once every year, maybe.
I feel like Facebook makes it easier.
That's true.
Like
That's
people I
true.
probably normally wouldn't keep in touch with from high school, it's easier to.
Does it count in the same way, is the question, right? And so we've got some degree of relational integration, but it's integrating all of your relationships simultaneously. And so that suggests that it's as much about expression as it is about integration, i.e. self-expression, to be really blunt. Doesn't it seem a lot of times like what Facebook is about? It's less about staying in touch and a little bit more about there's a sense in which it either gets used for troubles talk most of the time or for status updates that are a little bit about status, right? Social status. And you probably have groups of friends that do each of those sets of norms, but either which way, you understand that whether it's positive or negative actually has no impact at all, because in both cases what it's about is expression, right? The establishing of self, social presence, all those kinds of things, right? And whether it's positive or negative will change a little bit in terms of how you feel about the group. Mostly in the same ways, though, that you'll have groups of coworkers where you know that the social norm is that they spend their time venting, like it's all the water cooler talk is we have to complain, and it's ritualized, and it's completely meaningless, right? And you may like that or you may not like that. You may choose to absent yourself from the water cooler talk if you get really tired of the fact that the routine interaction is to share troubles talk. But you're not gonna not work with those same people. Right? Okay. So that suggests that what's really interesting there is the expression, non-expression. When you are in a particularly down mood and you have a group where the social norm is towards the positive, right? Expressions of like, oh hey, here's this fun trip I'm going on. Oh hey, here's this fun thing my kid did. Oh hey, here's this fun thing, right? Focusing very much on the positive. What's gonna happen?
If you're a downer in your group,
If you're feeling, yeah, if you're
Usually
not a
you're not
downer
gonna
yourself, but you're going through a time.
yeah, usually you're going to hermit.
Yep.
You're not going to be invested in any of it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And so we then move towards a separation or non-expression, separation and non-expression. But you're feeling that sense of separation because you're not able to do this communal norm of sharing. Like, you don't have anything right now that's up. And so you can't participate in this like, oh, my kid is this. Oh, my kid is this. And so instead what you'll probably focus on is maybe bring in some other way. If you feel like you need to link more closely with this group of friends, maybe bring in a memory from high school of the time that, well, I'm glad you're going to go on this great trip. I've never had a trip as much fun as that time we went to the Ozarks together. Right? You'll invoke something from past. What I'm suggesting is that the stability change dialectic also provides a space for movement when some of the other ones seem like our relational tensions are going a little haywire on the expression, non-expression, integration, separation. I can use that change stability dynamic to remind of past, which is a stable feature, right? Past, assuming that we've mythologized it correctly together, which we usually will have, right? It may well be that that trip to the Ozarks I just mentioned, we kind of hated it at the moment. Like when we were in it, it was raining, it was wet, the tent flooded. Yeah, it's still going to be mythologized as this great, right? And we will have come to a shared understanding. Our coordinated management of meaning will have turned that into this like mythological, great high school adventure time. And so that makes it a nice point of security and stability for relationships that are otherwise going through states of flux as more and more of the people enter the parenting stage, for example. Okay, so it seems like we all have a fairly good understanding of the column on the left. And how it's best to use those ideas in some combination with each other. Yes, we can look at them individually. But in practice, what we do is we use all of them simultaneously. Let's see if we can make similar sense of the column on the right. Starting again with the one that probably is the most often talked about and the most obviously used of the dialectical tensions. What sense do you make? Can you give me an example with where you can see the inclusion-seclusion dialectical tension in action?
I think any time that you do, a really simple one would be like a kid's birthday. This is that you hand out invitations to everybody except for one kid in the class. It's a very, very clear communication statement.
Yeah.
Or I think that most, because you can tell if you're, are you in the in crowd or the out crowd, or the, determining where your relationships lie as far as what you are allowed to be included in or excluded for. And I think that it's interesting when it becomes a self-determined thing, like my sister deciding not to go to prom, versus an inflicted thing of nobody asks you to go to prom and therefore you do not go.
Right, okay, so for example, we all have, I'm assuming we all have, friends that we knew in high school who had a steady, right? It was not a lack of relational dyad. The relational dyad is fine, but the relational dyad did not go to prom because they didn't like that form of display, right? And maybe you were in that couple, I don't know. But certainly that's an example where the couple is focusing on seclusion as a more true expression of their relationship than the inclusion dynamic of going and being seen as couple. Does that make sense? And it's not saying that one choice is right or the other choice is right. Chances are good, if you've known that couple that did the seclusion thing for prom, there were other ways in which they made their coupleness public in some other venue. Because so, can we think of some of the ways in which couples that didn't go to prom were still known as couples?
They usually end up going to like dinner or something like that beforehand, or would do like a late night thing and other sort of things, or I don't know.
One of the ways, for example, that probably the couple I best remember were a long-standing couple. He was much older than she, and so our senior prom, he would have been 25, I think.
Oh, wow.
Right. So they did not do prom together.
Yeah.
Partly because that chaperoning thing was too weird for them. What instead they would always do is that they were the hosts for a lot of the after parties.
Yeah.
And so it was still very visible, it was still a couple's moment for them, and they made their coupleness visible in actually kind of a lot of different ways. Because it wasn't just after prom parties, but they would host other events as a dyad, right, together. And they would jointly coordinate about like making sure there were designated drivers so that we didn't all go home wasted. Similarly, think about family. How many of your parents, if you can remember, when they did their, big 20th wedding anniversary or whatever, how many had a public gathering for the 20th anniversary? How many was it private?
Private.
I was like 9.
We don't remember at all.
For my parents, because both my parents are remarried, for their 10th anniversary, they did have like a little barbecue picnic
Public.
with the family.
Yeah. Oh, not a huge public, but nevertheless, it was a family gathering.
Okay, would you consider a family gathering then public?
Yes,
Okay.
inclusion. And
Okay.
it's all about bringing
Okay.
together.
Mhm.
It's
That
not the
makes
couple
sense.
by itself,
Mm-hmm.
but couple as part of this group as a dynamic that's important to them. And so they celebrate their coupleness by bringing in others.
Okay.
Similarly, I mean, you see the same dynamics in terms of like birthday parties for kids. Right? There are birthday parties for kids where it's like you and the kid, or immediate family and kid. Others do very large group birthday parties. Everybody comes to laser tag. Everybody. Right? And I think,
Yeah, my daughter did a laser
yours.
tag. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the inclusion seclusion. What about conventionality uniqueness? Some good illustrations of that. Dyads negotiating that in relation to outside social groups. Easiest way is to think about weddings. Right? Every wedding has some element of conventionality, right? And that's one of the things we love about wedding ceremonies, right? What are the things, right? Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue?
So if we're talking about a standard traditional man-wife marriage, your dad walks you down the aisle, you throw the bouquet, you have the garter toss.
The white dress.
Yep, you have groomsmen, you have bridesmaids, you have,
And how many do you have as part of that inclusion-seclusion thing, right? We know the couples that have like 5, 6, 7 out to the sides, and it's this inclusive, this wedding turns into this massive excuse to gather everybody in this, sorry, and yeah, oftentimes those will be playing off convention in a lot of important ways, right? On the other hand, there's never been a wedding that didn't have some of the uniqueness component to it. Every couple expresses their coupleness as a unique couple.
they dog walk up the aisle, they don't actually use any flowers.
Right, right. So the Fairbanks couple getting married in the winter and choosing to use
Twinkle lights.
greens instead of flowers, or whatever, or, yeah, Christmas lights, maybe. And there are certainly examples we can think of where the uniqueness component becomes more important to the couple at different times in their coupleness, right? So you can think of couples, for example, that go through a phase of, for example, studying Aikido together as a unique way of expressing coupleness, right? And chances are good that's not going to be forever after, right? There will be times when, for example, more traditional gender roles will become more part of their day-to-day, right? They'll shift towards conventional. Partly because conventional is usually conventional for some reason, i.e. it's a cultural expectation, but it's also usually evolved because it's functional.
No, there's practicality to it.
Yeah, or at least it's not massively dysfunctional. And so couples will kind of go through different cyclings. And you can see the same thing with the revelation concealment dynamic. At what point does a couple, if one of the members is having some medical issue, at what point do they make that public versus try to deal with it within the couple, supporting each other exclusively? At what point would you expect to know it if you had a pair of friends that were fighting all the time and thinking about getting divorced? Well, it's hard to answer that because there's not a right answer. Different couples will have different, and it'll change over time. And it's partly because they'll be in different places on the integration separation with you, but it's also because they're having different, they vary in terms of revelation concealment within the dyad, and whether Patrick would feel like it's a betrayal in some sense, in a very small sense, but is it too much revelation that I talk about the fact of this we thing that's cropping up all the time, that I keep using him as an example. And my guess is probably Patrick would be bothered as heck by that. But on the other hand, he knows that I have different positioning in terms of how I manage integration separation with each of these dyads, because the student-teacher dyad is still a dyad and is going to be prone to all of these same dialectical tensions, right? You can go through times of greater integration versus greater separation. You go through times of greater openness, closedness, or greater expression, non-expression. Right? To what extent you feel like sharing on a given topic on a given day. And it's, of course, influenced by your relations with the others in here as well. Which is why you get a map on page, that's as messy as all that. Because your openness, closedness here is influenced by your openness, closedness with each of these others. And so the fact that they're in a constant state of flux is hardly surprising, and the fact that we can't, there's no point in trying to pin it down the way that one would if it were just the integration-separation dialectic. One might imagine trying to map in some way where each dyad falls and thus how each dyad influences the other dyads in here. But because each integration separation dyad